I'm going to take a wild guess that you've heard of Glenlivet Scotch whisky before, or maybe even just seen one of their bottles at a pub or in the shop. It's one of the most famous malts in the world, and the distillery that produces it, oh, it's not too far from here, just down the road. But I'm not here to talk to you about the Glenlivet whisky. I'm here to talk to you about the Battle of Glenlivet. It's perhaps one of the lesser known battles in Scottish history, but it's still very significant as it has been recorded as being the very first Scottish clan battle to feature artillery in it. You know, those cannon thingies that go boom boom. Aye, those. This battle was between Catholic and Protestant forces during a time of intense religious and political strife in Scotland. It highlighted the ongoing struggle for power between the Protestant government, led by James VI, and the Catholic nobility, particularly the Earls of Huntly and Erroll. It also highlights the complex nature of the relationships between Catholic and Protestant powers across Europe at this time, and the labyrinth of political manoeuvrings which occurred as a result. King Philip II of Spain's failed invasion attempt to crush England and the Protestant religion with the Spanish Armada in July 1588 had stirred up excitement in Scotland and strengthened Catholicism, prompting a rumour that the Spanish were once again preparing to launch an attack on England. Huntly is said to have taken advantage of both growing Anglo-Spanish hostilities throughout the 1580s and King James VI's empty exchequer by plotting to overthrow the king and the kirk with support from Spain. The Privy Council issued a proclamation on 28th of November 1587, enforcing a parliamentary act against Jesuits, secular priests and their resetters, including Huntly's uncle, the Catholic priest, Father Gordon. But this battle is also very significant as it's the first battle in the Highlands of Scotland where artillery played a pivotal part in the action. And archaeological evidence of this may well still survive on the battlefield. Glenlivet was considered at the time to be a religious battle between the Catholic forces of George Gordon, who was the first Marquis of Huntly, and Francis Hay, the 9th Earl of Erroll, against the Protestant army of Archibald Campbell, the 7th Earl of Argyll. Following a protracted period of intrigue, during which time Huntly was on several occasions implicated in plotting with the Catholic Spanish against James VI. The Earls of Argyll and Atholl were commissioned with the Lieutenancy of the North to go and deal with traitorous Jesuits returning from abroad accompanied with strangers and supplied with money to stir up public unrest. This programme of suppression escalated with a punitive campaign led by Argyll against Huntly and other rebel lords and clan allies. The two sides encountered one another on a hillside near Ben Rinnes, where Huntly had effectively laid an ambush for Argyll as he climbed the hill. In the ensuing battle, Huntly would use his horse and cannon to devastate an effect in the confined space of a pass to completely bewilder Argyll's troops. On 3rd of October 1594, Huntly, with around 2,000 Highlanders and 1,500 cavalry, launched a surprise attack on Argyll's army train of between 6,000 to 7,000 men, mostly Highlanders, high on the slopes of Ben Rinnes. Huntly's men were largely cavalry and would have worn chainmail and carried lances. They were supported by infantry and by 6 cannon, as I mentioned previously. If this is true, then it is indeed the first instance of cannon artillery ever being used in a battle so far north in Scotland. Argyll's men were largely irregular infantry, although they did include 500 Irish arquebusiers. If you're wondering what on earth an arquebusier was, well, let me tell you. An arquebusier, or an arquebusier, depends how you pronounce it, was a soldier armed with an arquebus, an early type of firearm used from the 15th to the 17th centuries. And an arquebus was a matchlock or wheel-lock gun typically requiring a stand or rest due to its weight in earlier versions. Arquebusiers played a key role in the evolution of warfare. They helped to phase out heavily armoured knights on the battlefield as gunpowder weapons became more effective. Over time, the arquebus was replaced by the musket, leading to the rise of musketeers in military formations. Arquebusier is pronounced as arquebusier or arquebusier in a more French style. I never was any good at French in school anyway. In a letter to Sir Robert Cecil, Robert Bowes, who was the English ambassador, he quotes Argyll's army as having a large number of the common sort of rascals and pike carriers who marched at Argyll in plomps without order. There was actually little confidence at court in Argyll's troops. His army, marching without guard or horsemen, was much scorned by the nobility, and it was thought they would be easily overthrown by Huntly. The battle was fought on a sloping plain just below a ridge of hills. The ridge comprised of 3 flat-topped hills. These hilltops are relatively bare, whilst most of the surrounding slopes have been planted with conifer trees. Huntly's force had 2,000 Highlanders from the Gordon, Hay, Gorman and Cameron clans with 1,500 cavalry. Robert Bowes' accounts puts the figures at 800 cavalry and almost 1,200 infantry and 6 cannons. The Earl of Argyll commanded 6,000 Highlanders from the Campbells, the Murrays, the Stuarts, the Forbes, the McGilverys, MacLeans and Grant clans, and the Chattan Confederation of Clan Macintosh and Clan MacNeil, as well as 500 Irish arquebusiers and 400 men from Atholl. The main elements of the battle comprised 2 engagements of skirmishes as each army struggled up a narrow path. The vanguards engaged from between 11 AM to 2 PM, followed by the main bodies from 3 PM until 6:30 PM. Argyll remained apparently 2 miles to the rear of the battle. Argyll's arquebusiers and archers had marched ahead, followed by the pikes and transport, leaving his missile-armed vanguard completely exposed to Huntly's cavalry, who drove them back to the main body. Argyll's men were then taken at a disadvantage, with his pike coming up behind with the baggage, while his missile troops were in the front of the advancing force. This allowed Huntly's much feared horse to do their worst, pushing the arquebusiers and archers back onto the main body. Although Argyll's missile troops did fire against the oncoming enemy, the presence of horse to the front and on the flank, along with the devastating artillery fire, made their position untenable and soon broke Argyll's force, leaving apparently several hundred dead. Regarding the artillery cannons that would have been used in this battle, I've added some clips here of cannons and what it might have looked like at the time. These clips are taken from one of my other YouTube videos where I visited a Covenanter reenactment battle at Fyvie Castle in 2024, which, let me tell you, was bloody brilliant, and I ended up making a YouTube video out of the reenactment to tell the story of who were the Covenanters. I'll add the link to that video in this video description section in case you're interested in watching that later. Although that video's time frame is set around the mid-1600s, which is a couple of decades ahead of the date of this video's historical time frame, the Battle of Glenlivet, which took place in 1594. But the cannons being used at Glenlivet might not have been too different from what you see here at this Covenanter reenactment. Also, this isn't the first battle that cannons were used in Scotland. Not at all. Let me make that abundantly clear before I receive a wave of angry messages from armchair historians telling me this wasn't the first battle in Scotland with artillery in it. You don't know what you're on about, Nico, you amateur historian. Well, I'm not actually a historian. I just try to tell interesting stories about interesting points of Scottish history. But it is the first recorded instance of artillery being used in a clan battle. And when I say clan battle, that brings up another interesting debate, one that I've been having a few interesting discussions on in a Facebook Facebook group called the Scottish Clans Podcast Group, which is run by Clint Edwards, who is the founder of the group, and he runs a fantastic podcast and YouTube channel called the Scottish Clans, which, if you're interested in anything to do with Scottish clans, he is definitely worth a follow. In that Facebook group, there are loads of great and interesting discussions going on all the time about what is a clan, who were Highland clans, who were Lowland clans, and there are so many knowledgeable people in that group. It's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in that sort of stuff. Anyway, what I was about to say was, in this Facebook group, there's been a discussion recently about how do we define a clan battle? Does it have to include a certain number of clans in the battle? Or do clans have to be on opposite sides? Does it have to do something about who was leading the armies, what the motive was, etc., etc. But I won't deviate from our subject and go into that too much, as it's kind of a video in itself. But what I was getting at is that I think you can safely class this battle as a clan battle, even though it had religious motivations that instigated it. I personally would class this as a clan battle, as it was led by clan chiefs, and when I say clan chiefs, I also mean leaders of prominent kinship groups who controlled vast lands and men that might not have been considered traditional clans at that point in history. I'm more so referring to the Gordons. They have been identified in more modern times by clever historians who are much more knowledgeable than me, old amateur hour Nico over here. Is that the Gordons were, the question was asked, were they actually a clan? And one of the leading historians on clans in Scotland, Ali Cathcart, stated on the Scottish Clans podcast when talking with Clint Edwards a while back, that the Gordons would have been horrified if you identified them as a clan, as they didn't have the same cultural kinship traditions as their counterpart kinship groups in the Highlands. So, not to complicate the discussion, but when talking about the Scottish clans, which is a very complex subject over multiple different centuries, because it changes across the centuries, you cannot put things into neat, tidy boxes. That wasn't the case. So if you are a little confused at this point, then that's good, as you're probably supposed to be, because the Gordons were definitely a prominent family of nobility, and they were in command of this army, which contained more traditional clans from the Highlands. So does that make it a clan battle? I'm going to leave that for you to decide, so you can voice your opinion on that question in the comments. Anyway, on both sides of this battle, it featured a multitude of clans and kinship groups in both armies. The Campbells, the Camerons, the MacLeans, Murrays, Stuarts, Forbeses, McGilverys, the Grants, Macintoshes, McNeils, Gordons, Hayes, Gomans. You get the picture. After this battle, Argyll was quoted as having complained the following: "The great part of the army fled before they saw any cause of fear or enemy assailing them, whereupon the enemy was encouraged to come forward in their charge against us. It's reported that 2,000 of Argyll's men scattered before he could arrange his spearmen. Erroll and Auchindoun charged with 200 to 300 horses in a vanguard against Argyll's shot, which was his armed troops. Huntly then flanked Argyll's army with his 7 to 1,000 horse, having noticed that Erroll was almost surrounded, leaving around 500 dead. Erroll and Auchindoun, with their 100 horse, charged the shot, killing some of them. Huntly's field cannons also playing havoc on them, leading many to flee. But many, with the advantage of some bushes near the place of the encounter, stood and poured such a volley of bullets and shower of arrows on the horsemen and horses that Auchindoun and other gentlemen of Gordons, with the most part of the horses, were slain. The MacLean chief and Donald Campbell joined the fight and won 2 of the cavalry standards, including Erroll's. The English ambassador provides numbers and names of the fallen, including Robert Fraser, the King's Herald, who was wearing the King's coat of armour, which marked him out for death by having 3 spears run through him, provoking a furious reaction from James VI and a promise of revenge. It's also reported that after several encounters of 3 to 4 hours, both parties withdrew of their own accords, without the pursuit of any chase. Argyll gathered together and buried the dead bodies of his people, and making hurdles of boughs and plaids, he carried away all his hurt men. It has been suggested that Argyll was led weeping from the field, though others suggest he hid in the woods throughout the battle while his army fled, and Huntly's army are said to have sang Te Deum Laudamus, a traditional hymn of joy and thanksgiving. They then took their wounded to Auchindoun's tower house, while the remainder of his army dispersed. The losses in the battle vary from different accounts, but the most reliable sources state that Huntly lost around 70 men that were killed. Although a rumour circulated after the battle that Erroll had been slain, Bowes states that he was injured in the arm with a bullet and the thigh with an arrow, but not fatally. Huntly was also wounded, and 12 other landed members of the nobility died, including Sir Patrick Gordon of Auchindoun, who was dirked, then beheaded. 150 horses were also killed in the second phase of the battle. Argyll lost between 300 to 400 men, and the English ambassador Bowes notes that Loch Nell, a close relative of Argyll, as well as Murray Tullabardine's third son, stated that Argyll's master of household and 300 or 400 of the common sort were among the dead. Argyll's own report gives only 50 dead, but this may well be an attempt to save face after his crushing defeat. In the aftermath, despite their victory, Huntly and Erroll did not press their advantage. Instead, they made their way to Caithness to await King James's arrival. Though they wisely did not choose to go into battle against the king, and Argyll's army, they returned the way they had come, with Tullabardine and George Erskine accompanying the Earl of Argyll. On hearing the outcome of the Battle of Glenlivet on 4th of October as he travelled north, James was apparently furious, and he made his way to Dundee, and he was expected to arrive in Aberdeen on Friday the 11th of October. Despite appeals by many of the king's companions, the order was given for the castles of Huntly and Erroll to be demolished on 29th of October 1594. However, archaeological evidence confirms that while the order was carried out, very little damage was actually inflicted upon the castles. And before leaving Aberdeen on 9th of November, James ordered fees from Huntly's lands to be given over to the Earl's advisor, Sir John Gordon of Pitlourg, Huntly's brother-in-law. He was made lieutenant and appealed to the countesses of Huntly and Erroll, their wives, essentially to persuade their husbands to go abroad to avoid retribution. The Earls agreed to a £40,000 caution and to leave Scotland by 15th of March 1595. The Privy Council then sanctioned this agreement on 17th of February, and confirmation was received on the 22nd of March that they had indeed left the country. They then travelled in Flanders, Germany and Italy until the summer of 1596, having received a letter from the king stating that they would never reside in Scotland again if they did not agree to signing a confession of faith to the Protestant kirk, which they did on 26th of June 1597 in the old kirk of Aberdeen. Huntly's political career thereafter took on a different trajectory, and he was restored to the king's favour at the baptism of Princess Margaret on the 17th of April 1599, where he was then granted his rank as a Marquis, becoming the first Marquis of Huntly. Despite restless persecution and continual attempts by the Church of Scotland clergy in the years following the Battle of Glenlivet, many residents of the region remained true to their Catholic faith, a testament to their strongly held religious beliefs, demonstrating that the kirk was ultimately unsuccessful in eliminating Catholicism from Scotland. George Gordon, the first Marquis of Huntly, epitomised the eventful times in which he lived, with his religious beliefs underpinning his changing fortunes, especially his relationship with the Scottish Crown. He was raised in France as a Roman Catholic, a faith which in post-Reformation Scotland would not make his existence an easy one. On the surface, he seemed open to change, signing the Presbyterian Confession of Faith in 1588, but continuing to practice his Catholicism and actively engaging in plots with the Spanish to overthrow King James VI. Despite at one point having saved the king's own life while serving as captain of the guard at Holyrood Palace. He was then arrested thereafter when his correspondence with Spanish agents was discovered, but he was later soon pardoned by the king. The king took the pragmatic stance that Catholic lords such as Huntly could, if kept on side, serve to protect the kirk from getting above its station, and was himself looking to the Spanish for aid in the event that Elizabeth I, a staunch Protestant, should challenge his right to the English throne, which he was in line for on her death, which he eventually received and became James I of England in 1603. The event, however, did not set the shifting sands of Huntly's fortunes, and there were still periods of imprisonment and more excommunications to come. Indeed, one of his last acts before his death in 1636, after losing his son to a fire, which may have actually been murder, and spending a final term in prison, was to declare himself a Roman Catholic. Despite fighting against the Catholic rebels at Glenlivet, Archibald Campbell, the 7th Earl of Argyll, was himself a Catholic, having converted to the faith in his youth. Later Campbells were definitely of the Protestant persuasion and were to become staunch enemies of the Stuart cause. This fact gives some indication that there was much more to the issues that lay behind the battle than religious faith. The 7th Earl of Argyll was not the most celebrated of the Campbells, and his defeat at Glenlivet has not really helped his memory. He seems to have been a less than happy man. His Gaelic nickname was apparently translated as Archibald the Grim. As if to underline this aspect of his nature, he then surrendered his estates to his son in 1619, though he went on to live until his death in 1638. So folks, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did have any other suggestions also for the next video about an event or person or battle or anything to do with Scottish history that you think is worthwhile sharing, then let me know in the comments section and I'll definitely consider it. And also it's worth letting you know, the bloody walk from the car park to the battlefield, I thought it would be like half a mile or a mile. It was nearly 5 miles. Honestly, it's getting dark here because I thought it was just going to be a wee little walk up the battlefield. No, no, no. 5 miles there, 5 miles back. I am absolutely knackered. So I hope you enjoyed that because I am absolutely scuddered after filming it. But anyway, folks, that's enough whinging for me. If you did like the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, all that usual stuff. But importantly, very importantly, leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm, because YouTube picks up lots of comments as good engagement in the video. And if you did like it, that's a great way to help me, as your comment will help boost the video. So help your wee pal Nico out, leave a wee comment, sorted. Anyway folks, it's getting pretty windy here and the sun's starting to disappear, so I'm going to head off home. But I'll see you in the next video. So take care and I'll see you soon.